what is the quote-unquote problem with Christianity? What is that? I know you say that in some of your broadcasts and things. What is the problem with Christianity?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First of all, let me speak about American Christianity, okay? Western Christianity, especially in the United States. I'm a positive guy, and I'm certainly not thinking that I do it right and everybody else does it wrong or anything like that, but you've asked a good question. A lot of people ask the question. So in my opinion, what I see is twofold. First of all, there is a dearth of preaching and teaching about the prophetic nature of the time in which we're living. We are living in the most prophetic time since the first coming of Jesus Christ, and most of the church is missing the connections. Now, that affects everything. That changes everything. That's a huge problem. There was a poll conducted by, I'm trying to think of his name, the researcher, the Christian pollster researcher, not the Pew poll, but Barna, George Barna. Gosh, how could I forget that? I've quoted his polls and written about him in several of my books, but the George Barna poll, he spent, and this answers the question, what's wrong? Because he asked that question. But he went for several years, he did this very famous poll, where he spent a couple of years interviewing thousands of, and his definition was, conservative evangelical pastors. In other words, he wasn't interviewing the pastors of the denominations that have already slipped into apostasy and that have gone super liberal, super to the left. He didn't even. He went straight to the conservative evangelicals that would say, "This is the Word of God. Jesus is the only way, and you got to preach the whole Word from Genesis to Revelation and make the connections." Those kind of guys went to 2,000 or 3,000 of them. Spent several years talking to them, and he asked them questions like, how often do you preach on the topics of, like evolution or creation, sexual perversion, pornography, homosexuality, gay marriage, the Middle East, Israel, its part in the Middle East, prophecy? And his finding was, in asking those kinds of questions, he says in his poll, over 90% said, we never preach on any of these.
Wow.
Or at least very, very seldom we'll touch on it. Now, over 90%, what does that mean? I'm guessing it means between 90 and 91%, because but still, 90%. See, and that explains to me, I do a lot of prophecy conferences. I'm on TV and radio a lot. I'm very blessed, and I write books, and so I'll meet people at these conferences and places where I go where they say, why don't we hear this in our pulpit? I hear this so much. Now, but here's what I understand. 10% of the conservative evangelical pastors are preaching and teaching it. So that means there are thousands of churches and pastors doing that. But here's the problem. There are tens of thousands that aren't.
Exactly.
And so when you're going to a new area or you're looking for a church that's going to just bring the whole Word to you over time, can't bring it all on a Sunday morning, but over months and years, you can preach all of that stuff and make it applicable to the life we're living in, the world we're living in, our day and time. When you start looking for that kind of a pulpit now, you have to look long and hard. That's a problem. You asked, what's the problem? That's a problem. Now, that leads to the second branch of what I see, in my humble opinion, the problem with Christianity in America, is that's causing, I think, this kind of apostasy that has swept through American churches. And once great denominations that led the way in some of the Great Awakening are now just as liberal and off base as they can be. So there's this falling away that's happening. And so Jesus said it like this. He said, if the salt loses its saltiness, then it is good for nothing but being trampled underfoot. Oh my gosh. Look where our culture's come in the last 100 years. Take the last 100-year chunk. Would you say that Christianity, by and large in America, has been trampled underfoot and still is? Now, they're not rounding us up and putting us in prisons. I get that. But there are millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people all over the world that have to deal with that. We're not having to deal with that yet, but we're lampooned and lambasted all over TV, all over media, in the movies, on television programs, sitcoms, late night talk shows. We are just trash. We're just garbage to them. The mainstream media trashes Christianity for the most part. Ripping prayer out of school, ripping the Word of God out of school, taking down monuments off of, public property. I mean, just go on and on and on. What's happening? It's being trampled underfoot.
It's still a form of persecution.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And the whole thought police thing, and the political correct, and you can't say that, and that's racist, or that's this, that's xenophobic, or that's misogynist, or it's just, everything has a title to it, because they know that so much of what the Christian message is see, they want us to stay behind our stained glass windows and preach the love of God. Well, that is an awesome thing to preach, but there's so much more. You've got to shine the light. You don't hide it under a bushel. No, you don't. You've got to spread the salt. And if the light's not shining and the salt's not salty, then the light goes out and the salt gets trampled under feet. And so that means you have to engage the culture. That's what salt and light does. These are engaging elements. They're change agents. Light just takes a little bit of light to brighten up a dark room, right? Mm-hmm. Strike a match in a dark room, and before long you can see all the way around. See, but the problem is that because Barna's poll showed 90% of the churches just aren't making all those connections, then the people in the pew don't get them unless they're watching your show or things like that. They don't get it. And so what happens, they don't know how to connect. And so when the political correctness of the world floods in on them, and they're told, you Christians need to stay out of politics. Well, in the dirty trick that Satan has played is that taking biblical topics like creation, evolution. Well, now our kids go all the way through school and they're told, look, evolution's a settled fact. If you even speak anything else, you're just an idiot and we just shut you down. Well, they don't know how to deal with it. Why? Because they never hear it from the pulpit. They never hear it preached or taught. And some of them even hear people say, well, but we got to, acquiesce to science because, after all, it's scientific. That's what's happening. That's what's happening.
Like this video? Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Watch the full episode of Shabbat Night Live this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then.